I stood frozen in the doorway of Trevor's apartment, my key still hanging from the lock. The scene before me burned into my memory like a photograph I'd never be able to forget. Trevor, my boyfriend of 3 years, tangled with someone on his couch. Not just anyone. My sister, Brooke. Her laugh, the one I'd grown up hearing, echoed through the room like shattered glass. They didn't even notice me at first. I watched them for exactly 7 seconds before Trevor's eyes finally met mine. His face went pale. Brooke sat up, mascara smudged, looking almost bored by my presence. No apology formed on her lips. No shame crossed her features. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I simply pulled my key from the lock, turned around, and walked away. Behind me, Trevor called my name twice. I kept walking. My hands didn't shake until I reached my car. Then everything inside me crumbled at once. I sat in my apartment that night with all the lights off. The city hummed outside my window, indifferent to the fact that my entire world had just collapsed. I wanted to cry more, to break something, to call Brooke and demand answers I already knew she wouldn't give. But instead, I sat very still and let myself think. Trevor had always been charming, the kind of man who knew exactly what to say. Brooke had always taken what she wanted without considering who it hurt. This wasn't surprising. It was inevitable. What surprised me was how calm I felt underneath the pain. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to make a scene. I was going to do something far more permanent. My mind drifted to Gerald, Trevor's father. We'd met several times at family gatherings. He was everything Trevor pretended to be. Successful, grounded, genuinely kind. I'd noticed the way he listened when people spoke, the quiet confidence he carried. Trevor had inherited his looks but none of his substance. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Gerald from a distance. Not in a creepy way, just paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. He ran a successful consulting firm downtown. He volunteered at a literacy program on weekends. He treated service staff with respect. At a charity gala I'd already purchased tickets for, I saw him alone at the bar, checking his phone with a slight frown. His ex-wife had left him years ago for someone younger. Trevor rarely visited him despite living in the same city. Gerald seemed like a man who'd built an impressive life but returned home to emptiness. I understood that feeling now. I also understood opportunity. I wasn't being cruel. I was being strategic. If Trevor and Brooke wanted to destroy what we had, I'd build something better from the ruins. And I'd make sure they both watched it happen. Gerald represented stability, respect, everything I'd mistakenly thought I had with Trevor. I began planning my approach carefully. Our first real conversation happened at a coffee shop near his office. I'd learned his routine, the small cafe he visited every Tuesday morning before work. I arrived early, claimed the table next to his usual spot, and spread out my laptop like I belonged there. When he walked in, I glanced up at exactly the right moment. Recognition crossed his face immediately. He smiled, warm and genuine. We exchanged pleasantries about the coincidence. He asked about Trevor casually, not knowing we'd broken up. I kept my answer vague, redirecting the conversation toward his work instead. He talked about a new community project with the kind of passion Trevor never showed about anything. I asked thoughtful questions, shared relevant insights from my own career in nonprofit management. The conversation flowed easily. Before he left, he mentioned an upcoming fundraiser his firm was sponsoring. He suggested I might find it interesting given my background. I accepted the informal invitation with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. As he walked away, I felt something shift. Not love, not yet, but possibility. I attended the fundraiser in a navy dress that made me look professional and approachable. Gerald spotted me almost immediately, his face lighting up with surprised pleasure. He introduced me to colleagues and donors, including me in conversations naturally. I held my own, discussing program outcomes and funding strategies with confidence I'd earned through years of hard work. People responded well to me. Gerald noticed. We ended up on the terrace later, away from the crowd. The city sparkled below us. He asked more personal questions this time, about my goals, my interests, the things that mattered to me beyond work. I answered honestly, revealing layers of myself Trevor had never bothered to discover. Gerald listened with complete attention, the kind that made you feel like the only person in the world. When he walked me to my car afterward, he hesitated before saying he'd enjoyed the evening more than he'd expected. I told him I felt the same. It wasn't entirely a lie. I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Over the following weeks, I strategically placed myself in Gerald's world. A networking event here, a volunteer opportunity there, always with legitimate reasons that had nothing to do with him. Except they did. We started meeting for coffee regularly, conversations deepening beyond surface pleasantries. I shared carefully curated pieces of my life, including a vague mention of a recent breakup that had left me reevaluating everything. I never said Trevor's name. Gerald offered quiet sympathy, sharing his own experience with betrayal when his marriage ended. He talked about his son with a mixture of love and frustration. Trevor had always been entitled, expecting rewards without effort. Gerald worried he'd enabled that behavior. I listened without commenting, letting him reach his own conclusions. During one conversation, Gerald mentioned seeing less of Trevor lately. His son had become distant, secretive. Gerald seemed hurt by the disconnect. I touched his hand briefly, a gesture of comfort that lingered just long enough to plant a seed. Something was shifting between us, unspoken but undeniable. The night I told Gerald the truth, we were having dinner at a quiet restaurant. He'd invited me, calling it a thank you for helping with a grant proposal. But we both knew it had become something more. Over wine, he asked directly about my breakup, sensing I'd been holding back. I took a breath and told him everything. Trevor, Brooke, walking in on them. The complete betrayal by two people who were supposed to love me. Gerald's expression shifted through shock, anger, and something that looked like shame. He apologized for his son, voice tight with controlled fury. I told him he had nothing to apologize for, that Trevor's choices weren't his responsibility. But Gerald insisted Trevor should have been raised better, taught to value people. I watched him process the revelation, saw the moment he truly understood who his son had become. He asked why I'd never mentioned it before. I met his eyes and said honestly that I hadn't wanted his pity. I wanted to move forward, not backward. He reached across the table and took my hand. We stayed like that for a long moment, something unspoken settling between us. I threw myself into work with renewed focus. A major grant came through for my organization, expanding our youth programs significantly. I led the implementation, working late nights and early mornings. The challenge energized me in ways Trevor's drama never had. I wasn't running from heartbreak. I was building something meaningful. Gerald checked in regularly, asking about the project, offering advice when I needed it. But he never pressured me for more than I wanted to give. I appreciated his patience. I started going to the gym, not to change my appearance but to reclaim my body as my own. I cut my hair shorter, bought clothes that made me feel powerful. I invested in myself completely. Friends noticed the change, commenting on my confidence. I smiled and said I'd finally figured out what I wanted. At a gallery opening one evening, I ran into Trevor and Brooke. They looked uncomfortable seeing me so composed. I greeted them politely, introduced them to the colleague I'd brought, and moved on without drama. I saw Trevor's confusion, Brooke's irritation. I felt nothing but satisfaction. Trevor had started posting constantly on social media, carefully crafted images of his supposedly perfect life. New car, expensive dinners, gym selfies with motivational captions. It all screamed insecurity. I watched from a distance, tracking the pattern. He'd tagged Brooke in several posts, both of them grinning like they'd won something. Comments from mutual friends felt forced, supportive but hollow. People knew what they'd done. Nobody respected it. I learned through mutual connections that Trevor had been bragging about a promotion that hadn't actually happened yet. He'd exaggerated his role on a project, taking credit for work others had done. Classic Trevor. I also heard he'd been asking about me, trying to find out who I was seeing. The questions felt possessive, like he wanted to make sure I wasn't moving on even though he'd destroyed us. I found it pathetic. Meanwhile, I continued building my relationship with Gerald. We'd progressed to weekly dinners, long phone conversations, genuine friendship that was slowly becoming something deeper. I never rushed it. Good things required patience. Gerald invited me to his company's annual summer gathering, a casual barbecue at his house. I knew Trevor would be there. I accepted immediately. I arrived in a sundress that was elegant without trying too hard, carrying homemade dessert that Gerald had mentioned loving. He greeted me at the door with a hug that lasted just long enough to feel significant. Inside, the party buzzed with colleagues and family. I moved through the crowd easily, introducing myself, making conversation. People responded warmly. I felt Gerald's eyes on me throughout, watching with something that looked like pride. Then Trevor walked in with Brooke. His face went through several expressions when he saw me. Confusion, anger, disbelief. I smiled and waved casually before turning back to my conversation with Gerald's business partner. I could feel Trevor's stare burning into my back. Brooke looked equally rattled. Gerald appeared beside me, asking if I wanted a tour of the garden. As we walked away together, his hand rested briefly on the small of my back. Possessive. Protective. I glanced back once to see Trevor watching us, jaw tight. During dinner, I sat beside Gerald at the main table. Conversation flowed naturally as I discussed the successful grant implementation, upcoming expansion plans, the partnerships I'd built. Gerald's colleagues asked thoughtful questions, clearly impressed. I answered with practiced ease, highlighting achievements without arrogance. Gerald interjected occasionally, adding details I'd shared with him privately. The familiarity between us was obvious. Across the table, Trevor sat rigid, barely touching his food. Brooke whispered something to him that he ignored. When someone asked how Gerald and I knew each other, he smiled and said we'd reconnected recently and he'd been lucky enough to convince me to give him my time. The implication hung in the air. People glanced between us with knowing looks. Trevor's face darkened. After dinner, I helped clear dishes despite protests. In the kitchen, Trevor cornered me. He demanded to know what I was doing. I looked at him calmly and said I was moving on. He asked if I was seriously hanging around his father to get back at him. I told him not everything was about him. Then I walked away. My career continued its upward trajectory. The board promoted me to Director of Programs, a significant jump in responsibility and visibility. The announcement came with press coverage, interviews, recognition I'd earned through years of dedication. I felt genuinely proud, not because it served my plans with Gerald, but because I'd worked hard for this moment. Gerald sent flowers to my office with a card that simply said, "Well deserved." That evening, he took me to dinner to celebrate. We talked about my vision for the organization, the changes I wanted to implement. He listened with complete engagement, asking questions that showed he truly understood my work. Somewhere during dessert, the conversation shifted. He asked if I'd thought about what was happening between us. I admitted I had. He said he knew the situation was complicated, unconventional, potentially problematic. But he also said he hadn't felt this connected to anyone in years. I told him I felt the same. We sat with that truth for a moment. Then he asked if I wanted to explore where this might go. I said yes. Gerald invited me to join him at several charity events over the next month. I became a familiar face in his circle, attending galas, volunteering at community programs, participating in planning meetings for his foundation's youth scholarship fund. People started associating us as a pair. I proved myself competent and committed, not just arm candy but a genuine partner in the work. Gerald's colleagues respected me. His friends welcomed me warmly. I built credibility independent of our relationship, establishing my own reputation. Trevor noticed. He started showing up at events he'd previously ignored, lurking at the edges, watching us with barely concealed hostility. Once, he approached during a reception, asking to speak with me privately. I declined politely but firmly. Gerald appeared beside me immediately, asking if there was a problem. Trevor backed off, but his resentment was palpable. I felt no guilt. He'd made his choices. Now he'd live with the consequences. I focused on building something real with Gerald, something based on mutual respect and genuine connection. The fact that it destroyed Trevor's peace of mind was simply a bonus. Gerald and I spent a quiet weekend at his cabin upstate. No events, no people, just us. We cooked together, talked for hours, walked through the woods as autumn painted everything gold. The conversations went deeper than ever before. He talked about his divorce, the loneliness he'd carried, the fear that he'd somehow failed as a father. I shared my own vulnerabilities, the ways Brooke and Trevor's betrayal had made me question my judgment. We found comfort in mutual understanding. One evening, sitting by the fire, Gerald told me he was falling in love with me. He said it quietly, without expectation, like he just needed me to know. I looked at him in the firelight, this man who'd shown me kindness when I was broken, who'd listened when I spoke, who'd made me feel valued in ways Trevor never had. I realized I was falling too. Not because of revenge or strategy, but because Gerald was genuinely good. I told him the truth. I loved him back. We kissed for the first time that night, tentative and tender. Everything shifted. This had started as calculated justice. It had become something entirely real. Back in the city, our relationship grew more serious. Gerald became increasingly aware of the full scope of Trevor and Brooke's betrayal through our deepening conversations. I didn't push him to confront his son. I simply answered questions honestly when he asked. He learned about the lies Trevor had told me, the manipulation, the complete disregard for my feelings. He discovered that Brooke had pursued Trevor deliberately, knowing exactly what she was doing. Gerald's disappointment in his son turned to something harder. He started seeing Trevor's flaws clearly, patterns of entitlement and selfishness he'd previously excused. When Trevor called asking for money to cover expenses he'd overspent on, Gerald said no for the first time in years. Trevor tried manipulation, guilt, anger. Gerald held firm. I stayed quiet during these conversations, letting Gerald make his own decisions. But I watched him grow stronger, more willing to set boundaries. He thanked me once for helping him see clearly. I told him he'd done that himself. I'd just been there when he was ready. The shift in their relationship was seismic. Trevor sensed he was losing ground, but didn't understand why. I made deliberate choices to separate myself from any remaining connection to Trevor. I deleted old photos, blocked him on social media, declined invitations to events where he'd be present without Gerald. I established clear boundaries with mutual friends, making it known I had no interest in hearing about his life. Several people commented on my strength, my ability to move forward so completely. I smiled and said I'd simply chosen to invest energy in people who valued me. Meanwhile, my relationship with Gerald became the center of my social life. We attended symphony performances, tried new restaurants, hosted dinner parties at his house. I met his closest friends properly, people who'd known him for decades. They welcomed me warmly, several commenting privately to Gerald that they hadn't seen him this happy in years. I felt my confidence growing daily, not just in our relationship but in myself. I was building the life I wanted, surrounded by respect and genuine affection. Trevor existed somewhere in the periphery, increasingly irrelevant. That felt better than any dramatic confrontation could have. Gerald and I had been together for 8 months when the conversation about our future became serious. We'd carefully navigated the complexity of our situation, the age difference, the connection to Trevor, the potential judgment. But we'd also built something undeniable. One evening, Gerald asked what I wanted long-term. I told him honestly. Partnership. Commitment. A life built on mutual respect. He said he wanted the same. Then he asked if I'd be willing to face the inevitable storm if we made this official, if we stopped hiding and claimed what we had publicly. I thought about Trevor's face when he found out. Brooke's shock. My family's confusion. The gossip, the judgment, the accusations. Then I thought about Gerald, about the way he loved me, about the life we could build. I told him I was ready. He smiled and pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. He said he'd been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He asked me to marry him. I looked at the ring, at his hopeful face, at the future spreading before us. I said yes. Not for revenge. For love. For myself. For us. The announcement sent shockwaves through everyone who knew us. Gerald posted a simple photo of us together, my hand visible with the ring, caption reading, "She said yes." The comments exploded within minutes. Congratulations mixed with confusion, questions, barely concealed shock. Several people tagged Trevor, asking if he'd known. He didn't respond publicly. Privately, my phone erupted with messages. Friends expressing surprise, asking if this was real, wondering how it had happened. I responded selectively, confirming the engagement to people who mattered. My parents called, voices tight with confusion. I explained calmly. Gerald was a good man who loved me. We'd built a relationship over months of genuine connection. Yes, I knew the situation was unconventional. No, I didn't care what people thought. They struggled to respond. Brooke sent a single text. "Are you serious right now?" I deleted it without answering. The person I most anticipated hearing from stayed silent. Trevor. For 3 days. Then finally, a call. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. And again. I blocked his number. Gerald asked if I was okay. I told him I'd never been better. It was true. The weeks following our engagement were challenging. People had opinions, most of them loud. Some friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the situation's complexity. Others rallied around us, defending our right to happiness. My family remained awkwardly neutral, unsure how to process their daughter marrying her ex-boyfriend's father. I stopped trying to make them understand. Gerald's social circle was more accepting. They'd watched him alone for years. They saw how happy I made him. That mattered more than conventional timelines. Brooke showed up at my apartment once, demanding to talk. I almost didn't let her in. But curiosity won. She looked angry and desperate. She accused me of being vindictive, of using Gerald to hurt Trevor. I asked if she'd considered how sleeping with my boyfriend might hurt me. She had no answer. I told her my relationship with Gerald had nothing to do with her or Trevor. They were irrelevant to my happiness now. She left furious. I felt nothing. The gossip eventually died down as new scandals emerged. People moved on. We continued building our life together, immune to outside noise. I'd learned something important. Living well wasn't about revenge. It was about refusing to let other people's choices define your worth. Trevor's life started unraveling in visible ways. The promotion he'd bragged about went to someone else. His relationship with Brooke grew turbulent, fights spilling into public spaces. Mutual friends reported back about his drinking, his angry outbursts, his obsession with Gerald and me. He'd started showing up places he knew we'd be, watching from a distance. It was unsettling but not threatening enough to address legally. Gerald noticed his son's deterioration with sad resignation. He tried reaching out several times, offering support, suggesting therapy. Trevor rejected every attempt, too proud to admit he was struggling. The final breaking point came at a family dinner Gerald's mother had insisted on hosting. Trevor arrived drunk, belligerent. He made a scene, accusing me of manipulation, calling Gerald a fool, airing grievances that made everyone uncomfortable. Gerald asked him to leave. Trevor refused. Gerald's brother physically escorted him out. The room sat in horrible silence afterward. Gerald apologized to everyone, especially me. I squeezed his hand and said it wasn't his fault. His mother pulled me aside later, apologizing for Trevor's behavior. She said I'd been good for Gerald, that she was grateful for me. That validation from his family meant everything. Gerald and I married quietly 3 months later. Small ceremony, close friends and supportive family only. Neither Trevor nor Brooke received invitations. The day was perfect, simple, focused on commitment rather than spectacle. I wore a cream dress that made me feel beautiful. Gerald cried when I walked down the aisle. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, promising partnership, honesty, and choosing each other daily. The reception felt joyful, intimate, exactly what we wanted. Our honeymoon was 2 weeks in Italy, exploring cities, eating incredible food, being completely present with each other. When we returned, I moved into Gerald's house. Our house now. I made spaces mine, blending our lives physically. We established routines, rhythms, the small intimacies that build a marriage. Gerald was considerate, affectionate, genuinely invested in my happiness. I felt cherished in ways I'd never experienced. Sometimes I still thought about Trevor, wondering if he knew I'd married his father. Wondering how that knowledge sat in his chest. But mostly I didn't think about him at all. He'd become a footnote in my story, a catalyst that led me somewhere better. I'd found peace. Life settled into comfortable patterns. I continued advancing in my career, Gerald in his. We supported each other's work, celebrated successes, navigated challenges together. At social events, I watched Trevor's former friends gravitate toward us, respecting the life we'd built. Several commented privately about Trevor's decline, his inability to maintain relationships, his professional stagnation. I never participated in the gossip. I didn't need to. The contrast between our lives spoke for itself. At a charity auction, Trevor attended with a new girlfriend, clearly trying to prove he'd moved on. She looked uncomfortable as he drank too much and laughed too loudly. Gerald and I sat at a front table, quiet and composed. I bid on several items, winning a photography package that benefited the literacy program. People congratulated me warmly. Trevor watched from across the room, face dark with resentment. His girlfriend asked who we were. I didn't hear his answer, but her expression shifted to shock. She left shortly after. Trevor stayed, alone at the bar. I felt something unexpected watching him. Not satisfaction. Pity. He'd had opportunities for growth and chosen bitterness instead. That was his tragedy, not mine. A family secret emerged that shifted everything further. Gerald's mother pulled me aside during a holiday gathering, sharing something she'd kept quiet for years. Trevor wasn't actually Gerald's biological son. Gerald's ex-wife had had an affair early in their marriage. She'd confessed years later during the divorce. Gerald had chosen to raise Trevor anyway, loving him as his own despite the betrayal. He'd never told Trevor the truth, not wanting to damage their relationship. But Trevor's recent behavior had made her reconsider the secret. She asked if I thought Gerald should tell him. I thought carefully before answering. This wasn't my decision to make. But I suggested that Gerald deserved freedom from carrying this alone, that secrets gave power to the wrong people. She agreed. 2 weeks later, Gerald told Trevor the truth. The revelation destroyed whatever fragile relationship remained. Trevor reacted with rage, accusing Gerald of lying his entire life. Gerald responded calmly that he'd given Trevor family, love, and support regardless of biology. That he'd earned nothing but cruelty in return. Trevor left and didn't contact Gerald again. It hurt Gerald deeply. But he also seemed lighter, unburdened. 6 months after our wedding, I ran into Trevor at a coffee shop. He looked terrible, exhausted and defeated. We made eye contact across the room. For a moment, I thought he'd leave. Instead, he approached my table. He asked if we could talk. I hesitated, then nodded. He sat down heavily. He didn't apologize for what he'd done to me, but he admitted he'd destroyed everything good in his life through his own choices. He said watching me build a life with Gerald had forced him to confront who he'd become. He looked broken in ways that went beyond our history. I listened without offering comfort or forgiveness. When he finished, I said simply that I hoped he found a way forward. Then I left. I told Gerald about the encounter that evening. He asked how I felt. I realized I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering pain. Trevor had become a stranger whose choices no longer affected me. That closure felt profound. I'd fully moved on, not just in action but in heart. The girl who'd walked in on her boyfriend with her sister was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd rebuilt everything stronger. Standing in my life now, I barely recognize the person I was 3 years ago. I have a career I love, a marriage built on respect and genuine affection, a community that values me. Gerald and I host dinner parties where laughter fills our home. We travel, explore, build memories that belong only to us. I've reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during my relationship with Trevor. I've made new ones through Gerald's world. My family eventually accepted our marriage, seeing how happy I am. Even my relationship with my parents has improved, though Brooke remains distant. I don't miss her. Some wounds don't heal, and that's acceptable. Trevor exists somewhere in the city, living whatever life he's managed to build from the wreckage. I hear occasional updates through mutual connections. He's working a job he hates, single, isolated. Part of me wishes him peace. Most of me simply doesn't think about him. What started as calculated justice became something transformative. I learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building a life so fulfilling that the people who hurt you become irrelevant. I'm not Trevor's ex-girlfriend anymore. I'm Gerald's wife. I'm a respected professional. I'm a woman who chose herself and found everything she needed. That's the ending I wrote. That's the life I claimed. What would you have done differently? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell for more Reddit stories. Give a thumbs up and share with others. Thanks for watching.